the next step of leadership to me is when you grow a team is to realize that growth always requires getting people out of their comfort zone. So if I'm asking someone to do something that I would usually do for them, that means that someone now has to do something they're not comfortable doing. They might not like it, but part of learning means being uncomfortable. So I'm comfortable with people being uncomfortable around me in a way. So if I'm a team leader, if I'm an appointed team leader, I shouldn't be afraid of a team that's feeling uncomfortable and maybe even a bit frustrated.
Yeah.
Because it means usually they're learning something they've never done before.
Welcome back to the Exploring Podcast. My name is Teja, and thanks to each and every single one of you who come back every time to learn, to execute, and to exploit for a better purpose. I am so happy today that you are taking your time out of your day for becoming a better version in mindset, our heart set, and the things that we always talk about, leveraging the technology or business in life with a purpose, right? And I'm genuinely so grateful that we are growing together with an incredible guest that I'm about to introduce you to. And he is someone so deep into the blood of leadership and leading teams over a decade now. And as you already know, he is none other than Osherove. Before we move ahead, a huge shout out to Talk Python Training for sponsoring this episode. Exploiting is all about loading up your career in the tech space. Learning a bit of Python will allow you to take your expertise and 10x it with automation, APIs, and even AI. The best place on internet to learn Python is our Talk Python Training. Visit talkpython.fm/exploiting to find your next level. Now, onto the ad-free show. Roy is a software engineer, tester, consultant, coach, and a leader. He worked in various technical positions for over 20 years in both small startups and some of the world's largest technology companies like Siemens, Dell, AT&T, and spoken at various countries across the world in unit testing and test-driven development, DevOps transformations, practices, and leadership for technical leaders. On top of all of that, he's the author of the incredible book, The Art of Unit Testing, Elastic Leadership, which we are going to talk about, and an upcoming co-ops, pipeline-driven organizations. And these days, Roy is working as a freelance consultant and an on-site trainer for various companies across the world. You can find all of his work, a lot about content, at osherove.com, fivewise.com, and artofunit-testing.com. You can find all the direct links in the episode notes below where you can have a quick view and come back to the episode back again. And I can't wait anymore to start exploring with Roy Osherove. Thank you so much for being here, Roy. I'm super excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Teja. It's really good to be here. I'm happy to be joining you on this really cool podcast, I gotta say.
I'm glad that you said that. I mean, it's so often to have such an incredibly people like you on the podcast and talking about leadership for the very first time. Like, we have various shows and technologies and business and also about life and wisdom. But this is the first time that we are speaking about leadership. And I'm so glad that you are here to give a lot of wisdom on it and also a lot of explanations and your thought process behind all of your initiatives in leadership and test developments and test-driven TDDs and all of your expertise. Thank you so much for being here. And once again, welcome to the Experting Podcast.
Thank you. Well, that was a lot of hello. Yeah. So what do we want to talk about?
Absolutely. So what we're going to talk about is not about what you have done, but it's all about you. When I say you, it's all about your thought process and your, like, as I said, I'll tell you again in a very brief introduction. Like, I know you have a lot of situations in your whole day, like there are countless situations coming in your entire life, but there are only very few situations in your life that literally changed the way, that literally created impact in your life and also impact on the people around you, right? Maybe it's teams or the family or the community or the society. So, and the time when we get such opportunities and such situations, we exploit them, we make use of them, and we create an impact around us, right? So now, and I believe you have a lot of situations in your life like that, and we're going to reveal them, and we're going to share such insightful things what you have been doing for years now. Is that all fine?
Yeah, okay. It's an interesting way to think about that stuff. But yeah, I think I can think of a few situations like that help to that help me to either propel my career or to increase the quality of life or anything like that. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff like that. If I'm trying to think back, like I think now I understand the true why you're calling it the exploiting podcast. Initially, I thought, oh, it's like a security podcast, and I'm okay. It's exploiting situations and finding the right leverage points in your life to jump into and to make something out of it. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So specifically to just start with my curious question, like everyone out there who can't be a leader at the very first place, right? Leadership is not for everyone, right? There are like a very few rare minds who are actually the great leaders or the good leaders or whoever we term. Like that leader only comes from as a person, right? As a person who's been a part of the crowd and they become the leader, right? But you being a software engineer and a tester earlier, and then you took a step into becoming a leader as a technical leader, right? Now, how did that happen? Like, where did that situation came from you to take a step forward and take an action to help a lot of people working with you?
Well, I disagree with the premise a little bit that leadership is not for everyone, or that not. I would say most people should be able to achieve some kind of leadership role or position, even if it's not mandated but effective. And I do believe that to be able to become that, you'll have to get out of your comfort zone. That's true for many people and true for me as well. So in that regard, I don't want people to think is that it's 1 in 1,000 or whatever. That's not true. I think, especially in the software engineering world, in the technology world, a lot of the leaders are simply, a lot of times, people who just have louder voices. And louder voice doesn't mean shouting, but it does mean that you're able to hear them more easily or across multiple platforms. And when I'm thinking back to where my initial technology career started as a developer, I think the first big break that I got, the first time I realized that having your voice heard is actually a very beneficial thing, is I started a long time ago, probably 20 years ago, my blog. And that when it started, blogs were all the rage, basically. And my blog was on the Microsoft platform, weblogs.asp.net. Some of you might remember that. And there weren't a lot of bloggers back then, especially in the technology space. And I was just blogging about, software development and C# and whatever. And it wasn't the most amazing content in the world. It was just like, oh, I discovered this. It's kind of like what Twitter is today. I would write sometimes short stuff, sometimes, oh, you're coming across this problem, here's a solution for that, because I knew that people would Google that problem, because I'm not the only one who comes across those problems. And it's funny because I've kept all of my blogs since then. I think it's all the way to 2006. Yeah. And to this day, I still get hits on blog posts that I wrote more than 10 years ago about obscure technological problems in C# or whatever. It's pretty crazy. So some people are still stuck in that legacy code. They still go to my blog. Anyway, you're talking about exploiting. So I truly believe that to be able to get a foothold, to gain an advantage in your career, to be able to have options on where you want to go, you have to be visible. And that blog was the initial catalyst for a lot of the stuff that I did later on. Through the blog, I got at least 3 different jobs, because here's a very, very simple example. I don't know if you know this, but when you write a blog post and you mention someone else's blog post, that someone usually would get like a trackback link at their blog comments automatically. It's like if someone talks about you on Twitter today, you'll be notified, right? That was before Twitter, so it's like a mention.
Yeah.
So at some point, I saw that a person who works at a company I wanted to work for, they have a blog as well. It was another Israeli guy. So I thought, how do I get that person's attention? So I saw what he wrote about, and then I wrote my own blog post talking about the same thing and linking to his blog post. That's it. It was like a completely passive move. And eventually what I saw is that he started connecting with me because he saw stuff that I wrote, because he noticed that, oh, someone else writes about that stuff. And eventually that person interviewed me, and we didn't really get a job, but we had a great relationship. We know each other to this day. And that person was able to get me on in conference engagements and helping me with getting a Microsoft MVP at some point, and a lot of stuff like that. So
Cool.
if we're talking about exploiting the situation for good, blogs were one of the first kind of leverage points that I discovered. Today, everyone and their mother basically has a blog, right? But that was at the beginning. So does that mean that if you have a blog today, you can't leverage it? Absolutely, yes, you can, because most developers still do not actually have blogs, and if they do, they don't usually are not optimizing their usage to gain some kind of advantage. So if you're in a job situation and you're hunting for a job, and you're in the other candidate are on the same playing terms, but you have a blog and that other person doesn't. If you have a blog where you write about stuff that you're passionate about and all that stuff, you immediately gain some kind of an advantage because there is some extra meat to whatever it is you do.
Yeah.
Through that blog, I've gotten speaking engagements. I've gotten, and through those speaking engagements, I got to meet other people who were writing books. And at some point, someone said, "Oh, you know a lot about C#, whatever. Maybe you can help add a chapter to my book." And they connected me with a book publisher, with Manning. But I was like, I don't want to write that, but I do want to write my own book about unit testing. And so I was already connected to the publisher, so I suggested that book publisher, that book, and The Art of Unit Testing was born from that. So it's like a chain of events that leads to that stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a lot of work in the middle, right? And creating content and caring about that stuff. But there is a power multiplier. So if you're thinking about leverage today, where do I exist today with the blog sphere, etc.? So I actually have 6 different websites. I have a website that is about my consulting business. I have a website dedicated for my Elastic Leadership book, which is its own blog. And I have a website, 5 Whys, which is like that existed before the book. And a website about Art of Unit Testing, and a website about the upcoming book. These are all different websites, and they kind of link to each other because it's important, but they have different types of content. And then there's the Twitter, and I'm loading up on Twitch because I'm still there. Instagram, I never really got. It's like I'm not there yet. I don't think it's right for me yet. But if we're talking about like leveraging things and having the ability to write about leadership, here's another example. When I started, I wanted to write a book about leadership, but it took me probably 4 years to gather all the information I wanted to write. And how did I gather the information? This is a recommendation for everybody listening. If you want to write a book, start a blog. And that blog content will become your book eventually. Not the same words, but so I started writing a blog at 5whys.com about all the stuff that I saw in the leadership space. And as you write about that stuff, it forces you to think about that stuff better, clearer. And as you talk about it, you can start going to meetups and maybe talk about the stuff that you wrote. And as you explain things, you actually understand them better. And it forces you to think about them from the outside instead of from the inside. So when it came time to actually write the book, and I suggested it to Manning, I had 85% of the material already there in terms of ideas, and then it's about structuring them and then rewriting them.
Yeah.
But it's not like I had to reinvent the content from scratch. It was like picking apples from a tree. It's about growing the apples, and then you're like, okay, this one goes here and this one goes here. So writing the book is basically a manifestation of the thing that you were working on for the past years, about sharing your knowledge. So technically, if people read my blog, they would get all of the content of the book, but not in a structured manner. That's kind of the idea. The same thing for my earlier blog about unit testing, etc. So that's an example of leveraging the media space to gain, a higher volume, so that people hear you better. And today, the way it works is I have a consulting business, but I don't really chase clients. If people Google for things, they'll usually find, if it's things that I care about, they'll usually find a blog post that I wrote about that stuff. And that blog post links to maybe my consulting website, etc. So eventually people might get to me. And if they Google me, they'll find a bunch of videos, because every conference that I ever spoken, if they ever recorded a video, I always make a copy of the video. So even if their website goes down, I can put my video on YouTube later on.
Yeah.
So that video doesn't go to waste. So another tip is, if you're ever speaking at a meetup or at a conference, try to get it on video. A single video of you speaking is worth 100 blog posts. Okay, blog posts. And there is, there is that single video is now not only something you care about. It's a sales assistant for you. If people want to hear your agenda about a specific topic, they don't need to talk to you. Maybe they don't want to talk to you yet, but they'll listen to 45 or 15 minutes of you talking about that stuff in the best way possible, right? Because what is a conference talk? It's something you prepare for. You're preparing the subject matter. You have the the given, when, then. Like your conclusions, your summary. A conference talk is you presenting yourself in the best light possible on the subject that you feel you know best. So if people see you in that light the first time, then their impression of you will be very, very positive, and they'll come into a meeting with you with that in mind. So always try to get yourself on camera if possible, and if it's not possible because you're afraid of doing it, etc., that's where I think getting out of your comfort zone is a true important skill to be able to do. And it's not always easy, but there's all this stuff that you can do that is beyond just staying in your lane and just working on your computer. There is that stuff about being visible, being out there. And I think this is the world we live in. The world we live in is a world where everyone is connected. And if you're not connected, then you're less visible. So only a handful of people know you. You can be the most amazing developer in the world, and maybe 10 people know how good you are in the software world. And that's great, because maybe that's where you exactly want to be. But if you want to expand, then you're going to have to usually change something, right? Otherwise, the amount of options you're going to have is going to be very limited. So there's that. There's at some point we went to Scandinavia. I went with my wife and 3 kids, and we actually went and lived in Norway for a couple of years. And the reason we were able to go to Norway is because I had a blog. Because my blog had become pretty successful. I had a lot of views per month, whatever, and I wrote about that stuff. And then I was at some point. I was invited to speak at the NDC conference, the first one in Norway, Norwegian Developer Conference. And it was very good, and I was teaching there once a month, and that happened again through conferences, because I spoke at a TechEd conference, and that's where they saw me. But then I said, okay, what if we lived in Norway for a while? How's that for getting out of your comfort zone? So I wrote on my blog, I'm looking to move to Norway and looking for someone who would like to hire me as a consultant or as a whatever. And it was pretty amazing. There were a lot of, there weren't many, but there were a few good job offers, and I got to be able to pick what I wanted to do, and that got me the visa so I could come and work, etc. So that stuff was like a bridge between countries. And then we moved to the United States, And a person who was working at Siemens at the time saw me talking in my videos and they wanted me to come and teach. And I said, by the way, I'm also looking about maybe moving to the US. They were like, well, actually. So maybe the lesson there is that when you are in the presence of someone who might be able to get you to where you want to be, don't be shy at giving them the edge of the rope for them to pull on. You don't have to be completely crazy, but you can be subtle enough so that the option presents itself, right? You can say, oh, I've always wanted to move to the US. We're actually talking about it with my wife, and if nothing happens, that's great, but if something happens, that's even better. So you have to give people the option to help you. So every interaction that I have today with people, I always usually make like a small list in my head of the top 2 or 3 things I want those people to know about me, so that my options will be bigger at the end of the conversation than they were. If I'm talking to a customer about maybe doing some kind of training, maybe I'll also present other types of training, or maybe I can present what happens after the training, what type of consulting I can do, etc. So it's not just that one scope. There's this whole bubble around it. There's a bridge, there's a rope they can pull. If they want me to work on a specific one team, I can also talk about how I can also help with cross-team communication, so I can maybe increase the scope at the organization level. Now, those are things I truly feel I can do and I can help with. These are not just like sales tactics. These are opportunities, right? These are the idea is that if you're able to help someone and they want you to, if you're a piano teacher and someone wants you to teach them chords, you can say, okay, I'll just teach you chords and then be done with it. Or you can say, I can teach you chords, but I can also teach you how to compose orchestral or compose this or whatever, like whatever you want to do, because that person might not even know that they could have asked you for that stuff. So that's another type of, I feel not comfortable saying the word exploit, but it is kind of a leverage. It's kind of a pivot point in a way. So that's kind of some of these things that jump into my head as you're kind of mentioning these opportunities.
Oh my God, that's beautifully said. The whole journey, like how it had went up and where did it came from and where the thought process began and everything, right? It's kind of like very fun and very engaging that you mentioned all of your process and how it all went and everything. But when you mentioned about like in the entire world, like people are getting over the things, like, but also like for the peoples, like, I have seen, and also it's been commonly known and most frequently asked, like people usually strive for positions. When they wanted to become a leader, they actually strive for becoming a position, looking for a position to become a leader, right? Maybe they look for a position, right? A title, they look for a title. So where I heard about somewhere around the blocks, like leading without a title, right? Like anyone, as you mentioned, like everyone can be a leader. So how would that be related, like leading without a title? Would it be weighable, and how would that happen?
Leading without, well, there are multiple names for this, but a roving leader would be one example. So leading without a title, I think that's what a lot of people do, even if they don't realize. And I'll take an example from the technology world because that's where I live. Let's take an architect. An architect is kind of an appointed leader in the architecture.
Yeah.
But what if we take a developer that really knows about a specific subject in the software process? For example, how the build works or the release works. What if we take a developer that knows how specifically this technology works and the rest of the team knows less? So they have to come to that person. Now, that person wasn't titled a leader, but they are a leader in terms of being an expert in a specific situation. So they are the person you come to when you're stuck or when you're not sure what is the right thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. So in that regard, whether you like it or not, you're a leader. Now, if you're a leader, you have 3 options. You can use your powers for good. You can use your powers for evil. And when I say evil, I mean, for example, knowledge hoarding, so that you have some more job security, which is, I'll usually tell people, hoarding knowledge for job security will give you the opposite of job security, because people will realize that it's a risk to only have one of you around.
Yeah.
And so they'll find a way to get someone who either shares knowledge and has the same knowledge as you, or to replace your knowledge with something that, with something, or either to get someone from the outside or to force you to share knowledge at some point. Maybe it'll take 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So those are two. But the third option is what a lot of people choose, and that is not to do anything, just being passive. So they're like tofu. They're not here. They're not there. They're like, I exist, and I'm a bottleneck for the team. And that's just, and I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm not trying to achieve something. I'm not trying to remove something. I just am. And I think that's where a lot of people are, and that's where the leverage can come in. That's where the pivot can come in. Because if you realize that you are a bottleneck in your team, then you can effectively force yourself to be a leader. And in that regard, no one needs to give you permission to do that. It's just basically your choice. Because if I'm the only person who knows how to fix something in the software process, and someone comes to me with a problem, I have a choice whether I fix it for them or I teach them how to fix it on their own. Maybe I'll pair with them, I'll sit with them together. And in that specific task, I become a leader, because I'm not automatically doing the thing that everyone expects me to do, but I'm basically redirecting the energy of what's requested and turning it back onto the person who was asking. And again, you can't do it 100% of the time, because at some point people will stop asking you questions, but you can do it some of the time for some of the people. And what ends up happening is that if you do it consciously and you tell people, look, I want you to learn how to solve it on your own so that you can save time. Next time you can just solve it without even needing me. What happens if I'm sick and I can't help you, right? If you're effective in that, then you're teaching people how to help themselves. And that means you're making them more effective. So your leadership is literally making people better. And eventually people start noticing it. They notice that when you're around a team, that team becomes better at this specific thing, and you become more valuable to the organization. And that, to me, is one of the principles of elastic leadership, is to realize that even if you're not an appointed leader, you have something that you are a leader in, and it's up to you to decide whether you want to do something about it or not, and to choose to be proactive about it. And that also means getting out of your own comfort zone, because a lot of times people are afraid of not doing their appointed role. They're afraid of disappointing. So they're afraid that if they say, well, I won't solve it for you, but I'll help you solve it, people won't like it. And I think that's part of leadership. I think that's actually a big part of it, is realizing that not everyone's going to like what you have to say. Not everyone's going to love it. And that's okay, because you can't please all the people all the time, no matter what. And so it doesn't have to be 100% of the people amazingly love what you have to say. In fact, the next step of leadership to me is, when you grow a team, is to realize that growth always requires getting people out of their comfort zone. So if I'm asking someone to do something that I would usually do for them, that means that someone now has to do something they're not comfortable doing. They might not like it, but part of learning means being uncomfortable. So I'm comfortable with people being uncomfortable around me, in a way. So if I'm a team leader, if I'm an appointed team leader, I shouldn't be afraid of a team that's feeling uncomfortable and maybe even a bit frustrated, because it means usually they're learning something they've never done before. If I'm not an appointed team leader, I want to make sure that I choose specific people, and then I choose specific tasks, and on that thing, I specifically push them, because you want to make it so that it's not 100% of the time, but you do want it to be effective. So you can choose. If someone comes to you with 3 things they need you to do, choose one of those things and say, that thing I can teach you how to do on your own. I'll do the other 2 things. And that way you're incrementally teaching them. Otherwise it can be kind of a double-edged sword. Yeah. but it can be a bit scary. And I think being scared is part of it a little bit. There's an author called Gerald Weinberg, and he passed away a few years ago. Great author. He wrote a bunch of books like Secrets of Consulting, etc. And one of the books that he wrote is Managing Teams Congruently. It took me a while to learn what congruent means, but it means like in flow, convergence. And in the book, he says something like, management done right is a tough job, right? So if you're doing it right, it's supposed to be difficult. But a lot of managers like to take the money, right? Because management is tough. That's why you get paid more. But a lot of managers like to take the money, but not do all the difficult parts. And I always ask when I teach the Elastic Leadership training course. So I teach like a 2-day training course on Elastic Leadership. So I'll usually ask people, what do you think he meant by not doing all the difficult parts? What are the difficult parts of leadership? And there are a bunch of stuff, but usually to me, the difficult parts of leadership are people. If we can get rid of people in this sort of problem, everything would just work perfectly. It's the people that cause all the problems, right? It's the human interactions. It's the fear of doing something. It's the lack of enthusiasm. It's the lack of motivation. It's understanding why people do or don't do something. That's the difficult part. It's like being half a psychologist. And I think a lot of managers are afraid of doing the difficult parts, which is talking to people, having tough conversations, having some kind of conflict. I'm not saying shout at each other, but conflict is a big, scary thing for a lot of people, to me as well. But I think it's part of it. That's part of getting out of your comfort zone. So we're not talking about pivoting anymore, right? But I'm saying that you can pivot. You can find a place where you do make a difference. And you can use that to the advantage of your team, right? And you can also write about your experiences. Like if I was a new team leader today, one of the things I would probably do immediately is I would start a new blog. It might have been anonymous, but it would be a new blog about my experiences as a team leader. And maybe eventually I'll turn it to be non-anonymous, right? Or I can make it not anonymous, but share things that wouldn't hurt my peers in a way, but just my own experiences. And I think I've seen a few people do that very nicely.
But why is that so anonymous for you? But why do we essentially need to put it anonymous and then put it forward to not making it anonymous?
Well, it depends because it's really important to if you want to be completely truthful. Sometimes the truth can hurt people, and it literally can create really bad situations at work. So if there's someone that you don't like, right? You can't just go, "Dear Diary, I really hate Peter. He's really annoying." And your name is there, and maybe Peter comes across this, or someone who knows Peter will, "Hey, that guy hates you, and he's working right next to you." You can't do that. But you do want to share what you feel, because those feelings are things that you have to get over. And the reason you hate someone is it's a problem, right? But what if instead of anonymity has a place if you want to share something that most people would not be willing to share. So if you want to share that, hey, all team leaders go through crap, right? Then maybe you can share that. If you want to be a bit more political, then do it non-anonymously and do it in a way that hides where it actually happened. So when I wrote about my leadership woes in multiple companies, I made a big important note about whenever I talk about an interaction that I actually had or a real project I was in, I never mention when it happened or what the specific project, and I would never talk about the project that's currently happening. And even if I wouldn't say it's the current project. I would say a project I worked on a while ago, or a team I was in a while ago. There was a person there. And in that regard, since the reader doesn't care if it's something that's happening to you right now, the reader cares about what you learned from it. They care what happened and where did you end up. So if 5 minutes ago I had a conversation with a coworker, and it was an amazing epiphany, but that coworker had a real issue. If I started writing a blog about it right now, and I said, I just finished a conversation with a coworker, even if I don't name that coworker, right? And this happened, they had this big problem. That coworker might be reading my blog. Maybe my blog has existed for a while now, and they're like, "Hey, he's talking about me," right? But what if I wrote something like, you know, it happened to me a couple of times where I've had workers come, and this a while ago I had someone, and maybe I'll change the gender of the person, and a few years ago it happened, etc., and I'll change a bit of the nature of the problem, because it's the lesson that counts. The material detail of of exactly what time it happened, that's where the danger happens, really. So you never want to be very specific if you're not anonymous. And if you're anonymous, never expose people's details, never, dox them, whatever. But definitely be truthful about, I've been working with a person, and that person has a very annoying habit, right? But I've never written anonymously, so that's kind of an advice. If you want to share something on your heart, and you're like, everyone's gonna fire you if they read it, don't share company names, don't share people's names, whatever. But share what you feel. That's kind of the idea.
And again, like when we go with like anonymous blogging, or letting the others know about what are our thoughts about something, like we try to express that, right? When we have a chance to be anonymous, there is a higher possibility and a higher probability that we become more open, right? More transparent when we have the thing like anonymous. But what I think, like, how if let's suppose, let me make like a role play, like there is a person in your team like who tried starting an anonymous blog or writing about things, then you are the leader who will be very much challenging about the authenticity of that, right? So how do you tackle that? Like, how do you get to find, like, is that a true thing? Is that really not? Like, how far about the authenticity of that anonymous blog?
If I find out someone's writing a blog, then I would never say anything about it, and they should do whatever they want. That's their expression, and they want it to be anonymous. So the only thing I would care about is whether there is some identifying details in there, and as long as there aren't, I might learn something from it, so I'll take care of it. But again, I've never seen anyone. If I've ever seen anonymous blogs, I could never place it to anyone. So the anonymous blog thing is like a point that I would say I've never really. It's kind of like a thought process that I had at some point, but I've never really experienced it on my own. So I'm definitely much more in support of non-anonymous blogging, because that gives you the opportunity to share and have also some kind of a fragility, to share that you're not perfect, and that you've come across. I've shared on my blog stuff where I was fired. I shared where I was. I didn't say which company, but I did share how it came to be that I was fired. When I wrote the book Elastic Leadership, the book starts with me being fired, right? And it started with me being fired not as a team leader, but as a team member. And but it starts with, what lesson can I learn about team leadership from me being fired?
Cool.
What could I have done differently? What could a team leader have done differently to avoid that situation? And there were many things that could have happened. So in that regard, if we're talking about pivot points, use your best lessons, which usually come from the worst experiences or the best experiences, and use them as your gunpowder, in a way. So the things that you believe in the most are the things that you feel about usually the most. And when you talk about something that actually happened to you and you connect it to things that you believe are true, for example, I believe that leaders should get out of their comfort zone, whatever, and I talk about things that happened to me that I feel very passionate about, there is no politics in that. There's no lying. There's nothing. It's just a true something that actually happened, and it makes you vulnerable. It makes you come from a place that nobody can fake, right? And that's kind of scary. But if you can accept the fact that all leaders have made mistakes and you're willing to share yours, maybe that's a good example. And because it's usually a powerful situation that happened, people are more willing to listen because maybe they've been in close situations to that. And I think that that brings you to the same level where people want you to be. They don't want you to talk down to them. They want you to talk because we've all been at the same level. We've all been at the place where you're grinding away and something and you screw it up. I screw up continuously. I've been taking on music production for the past few years. Yeah, if you want to talk about getting out of your comfort zone, music has been my kind of go-to when I'm not programming. And I've been trying to create this parallel universe where I create music for trailers and whatever. And I continuously fail and learn new things in this on this. And my plan there is to, in about 5 years, is to be rather successful in that to the point where it brings me as much money as software development. That's 5-10 years. That's my long-term plan. And that's the idea is that even there, failure is a continuous thing, and I still sometimes get doors locked because I've made a mistake in talking to people the wrong way, or making a mistake and not working based on the etiquette of what was supposed to happen, and so that happens. No matter how much experience you have, you're gonna screw up. I've had, doors closed on me for saying the wrong thing and I'm not proud of it. It's things that I had to learn the hard way, how to actually, be a bit more, reserved and explain myself better and not always talk about what I'm thinking right now, but to wait a little bit. Waiting a little bit has always been one of my biggest problems. And that's kind of, that's a thing I'm still struggling with. So it's nice to be able to reinvent yourself. So reinventing yourself is the third pivot that I would recommend. If you are good at one thing, that one thing will only last you for a specific time. So always have a backup. So unit testing was one. Leadership is another. Pipeline-driven organizations and, DevOps and all that stuff is the third. Music is the fourth. There's like these 4 different personalities. That's why it's also different websites, right? Those things, they're like pieces of a puzzle. It's all together, but that's where that all happens. So even if I never teach unit testing again, that's okay because it's kind of like something. I still love it. I still like it. I actually am writing a 3rd edition of the book right now, but it's not the only leg on the chair that I sit on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And when you mentioned about the team and also letting them, come out of their comfort zone to do the things that's supposed to be, like what I feel at the same instance, I got this question, right? So when we actually let others to put into their efforts into the things and come out of the comfort zone to do something, is that I think they can be doing it with their heart, with their blood, sweat and tears only when they actually love it, right? When we say when they love it, it actually means that, as you mentioned earlier, they need to be passionate about it, right? And in the entire team, like, how do you actually find the people, whether they are passionate or not? Like, that's going to be really challenging, right? So how would that be happening with you in your team? And do you really want people who are passionate, or is that not a requirement? Like, anyone can work with that? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
I used to be in the camp where you want to get the most passionate people. I think this is kind of I don't think it's realistic, and I don't think it's fair these days. I don't think everyone on my team should have a blog. I mean, it would be nice, but people are different, and some people have different aspirations than just writing code all day. They like writing code, or maybe they're good at it, but they want to finish at 5 p.m. or 3 p.m. and go home and be with their kids and maybe do music. So their aspirations might be different. So I used to be in that camp, but I think today that's not fair to ask someone to be passionate about their job. I expect them to be professional about their job, and I expect them to be good at what they do, and I expect them to be able to learn new things and to change with the times and to learn new skills, and that's part of the job. but I don't expect them when they go home to continue thinking about the job. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, today it doesn't make any sense to me because, the best comic I've ever seen about that stuff is, I think a lot of people have seen it. A person comes to a job interview and they asked him, so why do you want to work here? And the person says, I've always been very passionate about not starving to death. And I think that's completely true. Why do people want to work? Well, they need the money. They want to live, right? And who says that the life that I like to live is the life that they like to live? So I think that's today what I think. It's that I don't look for passion. I think passion sometimes helps in a way, but but professionalism is what I'm truly looking for. Because even if you're not living, even if you're working on this 9 to 5, you can still do a great job. And I don't want people to work at 11 p.m. at night and do their job, because I think that burns them anyway. Right? So if some people are passionate about it and they want to do more and more open source projects, that's awesome. That's cool. Have fun with it. If people don't want to even talk to me after 5 p.m. and they're not in some kind of, support shift or whatever, now let's go have a barbecue or whatever. I think that's where I am at this stage. But I'm 45. I'm 45, and I think that took me a long time to realize is that the world doesn't have to be made up of people who are 100% invested in everything that you want them to do. They have to be good enough and professional enough and helpful so that we're all able to have like a win-win situation. And I think that's good. What you don't want is people who are negative. That's that's definitely what I'm not looking for. People who don't want to learn new things, people who are not open to new ideas, people who are not open to trying new things. Did I say that twice? And people who are not paying attention to small and large details. That's the stuff that I care about in my job. If you can do that, then you'll make a great team member in any team that I'll be working on. That's kind of the idea. And and that's it. So from whatever time we work on, that's what I expect, 100%. But I don't expect 110, and I don't expect 200. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you've been leading such teams like quite a long time, for over decades now. So I mean, what does a good team member really mean to you? Like how would he look like? How he or she, like what is a good team member really mean to you? Like what sort of traits you look for?
It's like I said, someone who's willing to learn new skills, because the teams that I lead, I consult for these days is I expect teams to be continuously experimenting with new skills. So a person who's open to trying new things at their job and trying things they've never done before, that's a key. That's imperative. A person who's, if they try something, they try it all the way. That's a key. A person that's good at learning, or that is able to invest the time during the job to learn new things. A person who's not afraid of breaking down their own comfort zone and try. So I guess it all comes down to the trying new things and breaking down barriers. But of course, they should also be at least good at what they already know. But software is so fickle that the thing that you're good at today is not specifically helpful maybe tomorrow. So that's where we are in the software world.
Cool. I mean, again, the same thing, right? When you begin about the same way, like how you started with a blog, right? You started with a blog and then it went up to multiple sites. Now it's split it into various streams because everything mattered. It's on its own. So, but the thing is, when that blog's had a good reach and people are actually finding value in it and people are actually sharing it across to other people with the backlinks, is only when they found a huge content. You have a powerful value so they can learn and they can implement on their own, right? But the thing is, what really matters there as well is the thing that the way you presented that, right? The style of your writing. And what would be your advice for someone out there like wishing to have a blog on their own before becoming something? The style of writing, like what would be recommend them to actually start in a certain way and end in a certain way with a lot of context?
Well, let me just start by saying that writing the blog forced me to learn how to write beter in English,
Yeah.
fix typos and all that stuff. But I still have a lot of that stuff. But writing a blog or writing anything is a really good way to learn how to express yourself, just like speaking, public speaking.
Yeah.
So if you're writing a blog and it's personal, even if it's technological, I'm okay with having having typos here and there or whatever, because it's the content that matters. So just make sure that the thing you write about is something that someone might care about. And you have to realize that if you care about something in the, let's say, the software world, there's probably at least a few more people in the world that care about the same thing. So the best thing, like the easiest thing you can do is, if whenever you encounter a problem and you solved it, you write a blog post that says solved and then the problem.
Yeah.
And that's because people Google that stuff and they'll reach you.
Yeah.
The next thing you want to do is like a how-to or tips that you've learned the hard way. I had a tip at some point that says, don't break the news, make the news. So in that regard, don't regurgitate what everyone else is already talking about, but create something that other people will want to talk about. So try to create something that nobody has thought of. Try to create an experiment, or try to do something in a language that nobody's written, or a specific implementation, or try to put your spin on it. What are you bringing to this subject that nobody has written about before? And if you're not, maybe what you're bringing is how you are interpreting the same thing. Maybe the way that you explain it is better for some people than the current. My unit testing book was not the first book on unit testing, but it had a specific it had a specific appeal for people who had zero knowledge about unit testing. It was good at teaching people who are new. It still is. So in my head, when I was writing it, it was about no assumptions whatsoever. So anyone can pick it up. But some people wouldn't like that book because they already know a lot of that stuff. So they might go with a different book, and that's awesome too. So what is your particular spin? When you're writing a book, the publisher will ask you, what does your book bring to the world that other books haven't? There has to be an edge. There has to be an edge somewhere. The edge might be, I'm the only person speaking about that stuff publicly. I'm the only person in Israel speaking about that stuff. I'm the only person that explains it in that way. So if I talk about leadership, how many books about leadership there are? How many consultants about leadership there are? There are millions. But I do have my own specific take on it, right? I call it the elastic leadership. I have this kind of areas of comfort zones, and the survival mode and learning mode and self-organizing. It's not the same as anything else. It's specifically the way that I think about it. That's the way. That's my edge. That's kind of my pattern. So, if my recommendation is, if you're gonna start something, find out what makes you unique about that. And by the way, if we're talking about the music world, and if you want to make music for anything, like my dream is to make music for trailers. You can't just make the same music that all trailers have. You kind of have to be somewhere in the same scene, right? But you have to be unique. No one will buy that music if you're not bringing something new, a different type of sound, a different type of emotion, something. It's really, really difficult when you're starting up, because making music is difficult enough. But if you're writing a blog, you already know how to speak, you know how to explain yourself. What you need to do is to be able to find a way that says, oh, well, that person, out of all those people that are talking about, that person specifically, there's something here that's not in any of these. And it can be a very small thing. It can be a very big thing. That said, even if you feel that you are not bringing anything new to the table, even simply talking about what happened and talking about your experiences at the conference, which I've done many times as well, also brings value, and it's a good practice. It's a good practice for when you do want to write about something that's new. So you can walk before you run, which means you can write about things that are not unique, but be prepared for the fact that that content is not going to be the thing that makes you unique. If you want to be, if there's something that you're really passionate about, find that something and write about that something. When I was done with the unit testing, I thought, what do I really care about now? I've always really cared about builds and automation, etc. I want to write a blog about that stuff.
Yeah.
And I started writing a blog, and it was like, hey, I've learned a lot of lessons over the years about that stuff. I just never really paid attention to it. So it's about documenting things you've already known for a while. You just haven't put them to words yet. That's kind of the idea.
Cool. And also you also have 5whys.com, right? But I'm really curious, what are those 5 things? Why is that 5 whys, and what are those whys, and why is that so really important? What are those whys? Is that only for software developers? Is that or for anyone in general?
Well, 5 whys is a known technique for getting to the root cause of things. So I'll just start with the idea that 5 whys is a technique that no matter what, if you're finding something that happened and you want to get down to the root cause of it, you can ask why 5 times and you'll usually get to the root of it or close to it. So for example, in the software world, I created a new version of Microsoft Word, and there was a huge bug, and and that bug, the papers wrote about it, and there's huge security problem, whatever. Then I can start asking, why did that bug happen? Someone might say, well, because we released it because the bug wasn't caught by our test. And then the next question again is, why? Why wasn't the bug caught by our test? Well, it wasn't caught because we didn't think about writing that type of test. Well, why didn't we think about writing that type of test? Because those types of tests are something. Why are those types of tests something we didn't consider? Whatever. And so when you get to it, you'll usually end up with something close to a root cause that if you start changing that, there's a chain reaction on the way. So if someone leaves, or if there's a major screw up at some point, asking why is a great idea. If you're going to a job interview and you didn't get the job, can you ask the interviewer why you didn't get the job? Hopefully you can.
Yeah.
If they won't tell you, that's a problem. But you have to get to the first why at some point. So 5 whys is a great technique for finding root causes, and I really like that technique. And the domain was available. And I'm a big fan of domains, so I collect domains. I always have a bunch of ideas, so I have 50 domains on hold for ideas that at some point I'll start doing. And it costs $10 a year. I'm okay with that. And the idea is that you can use that technique in your leadership skills as well.
Yeah.
So I really like it. It's very easy to remember. By the way, that's another pivot. If you want to be if you want your voice heard, find a good domain name that's easy to remember, easy to spell usually, something that represents you, and that becomes your brand, for a specific item, right? Pipelinedriven.org, artofunittesting.com, Osherove.com, that's me, right? But the idea is to find that and bottle it in a way, right? So you create this kind of bottle that contains the stuff that you care about, and then you start filling that bottle with everything you can, and then be prepared for at least 2 to 5 years of adding more and more content until you feel comfortable about doing something more about it. But that content, it loads up, and Google happens as well, and that stuff, it actually, it's like a train loaded with cargo. You're adding more cargo. The train's mass becomes bigger and bigger. And as you write more, people know you more, whether you like it or not. And you're better at expressing yourself. So as far as I'm concerned, it only brings value to have that stuff. Even if it's on the down low and you're just doing it, 20 minutes a day, that's perfectly fine. Or 20 minutes a week even. Okay? Yeah. But if we're talking about Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff, I don't think that's where that usually comes from, unless you have a really good edge. Like Twitter, the stuff that happens is after the Biden and Trump event, someone created a Twitter account for the fly on Biden's head, right? That's like an edge. That was funny. It got like 100,000 followers in 5 minutes. But in Twitter, if you're a comedian, you write really good jokes. That's great. But blogs are for long form. They're for like expressing yourself. I think there still isn't a good replacement for that, other than maybe podcasts, which are long form as well. But podcasts require driving usually or walking.
Yeah, but when we actually have multiple domains, like you've been managing various domains on your own, like 5wise and like artofunittesting.com and Osherove.com and many, and you have a couple of, right? But we get audience engaged when we have a consistent postings, right? We keep adding the content and we keep giving the value out of it for maybe periodically, like once in a week or once in a month or twice in a month or once in every year. Like it's very hard to be once in a year. It's not good. But when we have multiple things, like how do you manage like shifting and switching back to various domains and working on a bit and putting in the content, and you switch back to another domain and you work on and you switch it back? Like how do you work with that?
Well, I usually don't work on all the domains. I'll usually work on one or two that I care about. For example, right now I'm working on the art of unit testing, so I'll maybe write blog posts. 5wise.com has been kind of stagnant, but there's a lot of content there, so people still get there. And every once in a while, I'll still have like a new topic I want to talk about. I'll write it right there. But those basically serve as the footsteps in the snow. So I'll usually write about them until maybe a book comes out, and maybe I'll keep adding to them. So the ones that are most alive right now are the ones where the book is not finished yet. Pipelinedriven.org, which is because I'm writing a book about that stuff. I really care about that stuff. And Art of Unit Testing, I'm going to create like a course. That's, by the way, another thing. You can take your knowledge and then make online trainings about it and then sell them and all that stuff. By the way, with COVID, I've made all of my online training free.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So all of my trainings on TD and whatever, that's free. First of all, because I think that's the right thing to do. People are kind of losing their jobs and all that stuff. And in that regard, I think that's the fair thing to do. But on the other hand, it also allows me to reach an audience that probably would never register to my courses. So when I finish the book and I create an online course about the stuff in JavaScript that I'm learning right now, or about pipeline driven, I have a bunch of new students that I can market that to as well if I wanted to. And they might be willing to listen because they got a lot of value for free. They might want to also maybe pay for the next versions of the new classes. So in that regard, that's also another pivot. I mean, that if you give real value to people, they're more willing to listen to you in the future. And that's where I think a lot of it is. And blog posts that provide real value are free value. That's basically it. So you're much more likely to have people that want to hear what you have to say if you're truthful and provide real value. That's why you have to have an edge. But you can find your edge later. At the beginning of the blog, I didn't really have an edge. I just happened to be, unfortunately for me, I just happened to be one of the first bloggers in the Microsoft space on that website. So I got a lot of free readers without that. But so I wrote a bunch of stuff that, some value. But as time went on, I was like, I can use this to document stuff that I got stuck with. And then I used that for it. Then later I used Twitter to give help or to ask for help. So Twitter is another network that I use for helping, for people to either help me or for me to help other people. But that's kind of basically it. So there's like all these things. I don't focus on 5 websites. I focus on, if I have 5 areas in my life, I usually focus on 1 or 2. And that's it. And the other things already have a lot of content. They're there to support me, to bring me either, more people to that might want to hear what I have to say, or they're there because when I want to add something, they're just waiting for it. That's the nice thing about blog content. It's already there. It's already giving value. Yeah. You don't have to keep adding to it. But at some point, you have to realize that if it stays stagnant for a long time, it will depreciate if it's technical. If it's about leadership, it's probably not going to depreciate for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a huge wisdom for all of us out there who is actually developers or leading a team, or for the people who are trying out to become a leader and everything. So it's a huge content out from you, and like a lot of suggestions and a lot of wisdom and everything out there. So I hope this will be having a huge impact on the people, and moreover than anything, the initial answers of you from your journey and all of your situations that had a huge impact on your career or on the people around you. So I think it's definitely helping a lot of people out there. And thank you so much for being here, Roy. It's been an immense pleasure in talking all of about the leadership, all the elastic leadership. And I highly recommend. I've been gone through a lot of free preview pages, and I scrunched down these questions that I wanted to ask you all of that, and it had a huge impact. But before we move and hop off the session, like, would you like to share something to the listeners who are the leaders, or who are the coming leaders, or who are the software engineers or testers? Anyone you're going to suggest something? Please go ahead.
I guess that if I had one advice is that being unique or bringing an edge or trying to change something in the organization is a type of leadership in a way, if you're using it for the right reasons. It can sometimes feel a bit lonely. That's what I would say. It's okay. I think that's sometimes part of it. And then you should expect a change. And I think that's part of it. It's okay to be afraid of it. I think being afraid and doing it anyway, I think that's a big part of leadership. So don't be afraid being afraid, or be comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that just goes with the territory.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get stopped because they don't feel comfortable and they're afraid of, people being hurt or something. And I think that's part of the journey, is realizing that by doing the thing that scares you, you're actually learning a new skill. And when you come out the other way, you'll realize it wasn't as bad as you thought it would be, but you have to go through the door. So good luck to you. And if you have any questions, you can always find me on 5wise.com and contact me. If you're like a leader and you have questions for me, you can just you can send me an email through 5wise.com and tell me about it. And maybe I'll have some advice, or maybe I'll learn something from you. That would be something I would love.
Yeah, that's the whole journey. Definitely. Thank you so much, Roy. It's been a lot of things, and I think the listeners who've been listening to this, if they made it so far, they're the people who've been really lucky, taking a lot of wisdom. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Teja. It's been a pleasure.